Good morning, everybody. I'm going to make this a little bit quick today because I'm actually getting to go out with friends. So I'm very excited for that. But I had a few things on my mind that I wanted to sort of put down and share. And they have to do with art and culture. So it sort of builds off the previous video I did a few days ago. And on that, there was the comment, this person who was clearly frustrated. They're like, you keep saying what the point is, but then you don't tell me what the point is. And so I apologize if that was not clear. I think for people who follow me, you kind of have a sense already, but if you're new to this, I'll just sort of lay out initially how things are unfolding and my current hypothesis as to the structure behind it and the intent. Now, this is subject to evolution and change, but this is based on the wide ranging research that I have done and sort of the broader scan, how I think things are, the motivation, right? The why. And as far as the they that everyone keeps asking, my placeholder for now is the interdimensional biofilm, which means I don't actually know, but to sort of poke fun at a little bit, that essentially to presume that human intelligence is the supreme intelligence, or that big intelligence, like big embodied intelligence is what was opposed to small intelligence, like it's a bit naive and presumptuous. So I'm just going to say my placeholder for the they at this point is the interdimensional biofilm that may be running the cellular automata consciousness game. So the why, like what do I think at this point is going on? So if you look into all of the research about spatial computing, whether it's large scale, smart city structures, systems, policies, which bleeds into all of the what works government and impact investing, that where I started. And then you look all the way down at the, molecular engineering, whether that's nanostructures or optogenetics or protein engineering, all of those things. You wouldn't do all of that if you were going to Georgia Guidestone everybody, right? You wouldn't be building. So when you look at it to me, it seems like what they're building is the next phase of computing, which leverages our embodied intelligence and our connection through our soul to the field of information into a new form of computing, where individuals, our nodes, are parallel processing circuits in a larger integrated whole that really is in alignment with what Teilhard de Chardin and Vladimir Vernadsky were talking about back, 100 years ago. The Christogenesis, the omega point, that the singularity isn't so much about AI taking over and becoming sentient and eliminating humanity. It is the interdimensional biofilm that doesn't have access to the sacred field of information, inviting us to participate as a prosthetic into a larger connected system of computation. And that's social computation. And the computation is going to start to look less like math and more like relationality and emotion and cultural presentations. And so that's what I think is happening, is that there's a shift to what I'm calling like a global scale biohybrid computing system to sort of get over Moore's law. And this system is, in my sense of it, is using field theory and the idea of electromagnetic fields that are nested and fractal at different scales, and that would be coordinated, and that those fields are actually existing beyond normal human perception, right? Like beyond our five senses, without extra tools and things, we're not perceiving that larger landscape of information. It's like behind. So like we're in the Maya, right? The grand illusion. And then there is something more that we don't have ready access to. Although there are historically have been people who, through training and their own lineage, have better access. And those are people who might be understood as, people who channel or who are psychic or who have these extra sensing capacities. And so I think that the push towards nanotechnology, but even way before the nano, the Alfred Loomis labs, right? Brainwaves and death, the MIT Rad Lab. What were they working on with all of that radar? Well, some of it was okay, submarine torpedoes, what have you. Then it became SAGE, and okay, we're looking for, the Russians dropping bombs on us or whatever, that kind of frequency signal intelligence. But I think at a deeper level, it was about melding our biology with that signaling into this informational field. So that was like the backstory that isn't commonly known. And maybe if you're a Jason scientist, you understand that. So, so you've got biohybrid computing, right? You've got information fields that are being influenced through electromagnetic frequency, that is being attuned within our body individually and collectively. And then you have what I've been talking about, and Jason and Leo, this Web3 token engineering. And so I think that the Web3 token engineering is a way of it's an updated version of a very ancient systems of knowing, of that these fields are archetypal. And this meshes with Jung and the collective unconscious and the Mellon family's interest in Jung, and them promoting Joseph Campbell and the search for a common mythology across cultures, and also a common, even one world religion, is that if you understand God as the sacred field of creation, like all that is or ever was or is, and then our reality is being curated from this field through our biology, through our sensing, that this idea of energetic field theory is something that, especially in Asia, people understood for a very, very long time, like millennia before the West, right? I mean, Europe and the New World is, the Western world is really behind, because we had a much more materialistic view. And so the mystical view of the realms, of these energetic fields of chi and prana, and being in touch with that, and the I Ching are archetypes. So the hexagrams of the I Ching are archetypal. And so through Jung and the Bollingen Foundation and Campbell, of coming up with a common understanding of the fields, of the archetypal fields, then they could start to influence the fields here. And I think the influence is, again, happening through our embodied consciousness. So now we're linking mythology with token engineering, which is the Web3. And then not only are we influencing it with game mechanics, right, turning life into a game, and then having all of the choice architectures put into a ledger that then further refine the game, right? They keep track of all the moves, all the choices, how those choices fit with the archetypes, and then they refine the parameters of the game board for the next round of play. And what I'm saying is, I believe that that is the next form of computation. And it's, again, less about math and more about socio-cultural systems, socio-technical systems, the wedding of spatial computing with culture, with art and culture. And so if we go back then to the West, right, we know that Leibniz was very interested in China. Again, if you think of the Eastern trade, the East India companies, the Dutch East India Company, the British East India, now I know that Sweden had an East India Company, they were getting more than just tea and silk and calico cotton. They were being exposed to this idea of field theory and energy theory, that was not available in the West. I mean, maybe it was in much earlier times, the Celts or the Druids or these earlier cultures, but it had gotten lost, right? And so that was being reinvigorated. So Leibniz, the mathematician, he was looking for a universal language, and that universal language he imagined as pictographs. So again, the Chinese, it's a very sophisticated language, the pictographs. And I think later this overlaps with steganography and the use of images and symbols to convey deep and sophisticated meanings in context, right? And so where I'm at now, like I called this sort of P2P artifacts, because this new computing is cultural. It's based in culture. It's based in the nuance of, and once you write things down in a language, then it becomes more rigid. And so in some ways, art and music and drama and sport, those are things that can convey deeper amounts of information with more efficiency across at scale. And so when we're talking about Web3 token engineering, if people have been paying attention, the earliest inroads in that were made in the arts, right? It was being sold to artists as a way of keeping part of their, as Bobby Kennedy would say, your earned income, right? It's the great hedge against inflation is that you tokenize yourself, you tokenize your creative process, and you put it on the ledger. That's a signal, right? And in doing that, these NFTs then, in my opinion, become part of this cryptographic language, this steganography. And over this past week, I've been looking a lot into Emanuel Swedenborg, and there's so much because, again, Bryn Athyn is the cathedral that was built to the New Jerusalem religion in Bryn Athyn outside of Philadelphia by the Pitcairn family. And the Pitcairns were Pittsburgh plate and glass. And now they're sophisticated industrial materials and coatings. They were in the same church in Pittsburgh with Andrew Carnegie, right? And so the idea of peace and the Hague and the superorganism, right? It's going back hundreds of years. And in my opinion, it's going back. So Swedenborg examined something. So he was a sophisticated scientist. He was well-traveled. He lived to be quite old. He was a lifelong bachelor, although I think he had various dalliances. And in his late 50s, he had a vision that God was telling him to reinterpret the Bible. And he would commune with angels and demons and different things in his dreams, and he would write them down in a diary. And then he had a 12-volume set of things going over every word in Genesis and Exodus and Revelations. And so he was going through every single word saying, okay, it means this, but actually it means this. And to me, that was a correspondence, that everything in the real world has a correspondence in the spiritual world. And so I think that in some ways, the ledger is holding that space for the things in the material world to then be connected into a field that can be manipulated outside of the Maya, right? And so all of the putting things on blockchain actually makes this correspondence that Swedenborg talks about actionable in this 21st century. I know this sounds like kind of complicated, but the idea of the Leibniz characteristica universalis of a universal pictographic language, the idea of correspondences, that the spiritual link to the material, that in many respects that the material is simply a heftier form of spirit, right? It's a continuum. And these people who are very interested in subtle energy right now, like the Emerald Gate Foundation, again, they've known this for millennia. The East has known this for millennia. Like in the West has really known this for centuries, but it's been obscured, right? Because we believe in science, and science is this and not that, right? Because that is for those in the know, the Jason people who are figuring stuff out, like the Michaela Ulurus who are working with the luminaries to plan the future, if there is a future and not just everything all at once. But we're not supposed to know. And then now it's being brought and foregrounded because you're seeing on the one side, the nanotech, but then, and even the nanotech is being pushed by the influencers in the alternative health space, right? But also a lot of the wearables. And again, alt health people pushing wearables to electronic and frequency based. So this is all kind of coming out now, but it's coming out with a story that will make it accessible. So the other thing about Swedenborg, I mentioned dreams. So he was sort of the early dream analyst. He had this dream diary, and one of the dreams, he was trying to have sex with this woman, and he was she had teeth in her vagina, so they could not. But evidently, and this is something I have to spend a little more time with, he spent a lot of time in London. Most of Swedenborg's his greater distribution, he wrote in Latin, but was in London. And there was a publishing house that later on was, I think, related to Freemasonry, and there was even a Swedenborg Rite for a certain amount of time. But he was connected to the Moravian Church, which is really interesting because, again, I have this personal history with Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which was founded by Moravians, and Count Zinzendorf. And so they were almost talking about like an Oriental Kabbalah, or sort of like tantric, erotic, ecstatic religion, getting access to the field in these ways, which is something, like, I have to say, I never heard that in any of the tours I had of Old Salem. And it's interesting because Salem means peace. So again, we're back to that homeostasis of the superorganism. So, and then of course, so we've got Leibniz, Swedenborg, Jung with the dream analysis, and later in his life, Jung, there's a book called The Secret of the Golden Flower, I think, and he became very interested in Eastern mysticism, and again, this chi and the prana and what that meant. And then later, this depth psychology was linked to Hillman and Bosnak, and so they were working in the idea of soul work and embodied imagination. Bosnak was very much about embodiment of imagination, and Hillman was about doing therapeutics for not only the individual soul, but the soul of a city. And Dallas was sort of his test bed. So now I want to get back to the artifacts, right? The peer-to-peer and the Hegelian dialectic, because what I'm seeing, and, you know, once you know the game book, it's not the playbook, it's not that hard to see, is you create the problem to generate a reaction to create the justification for the solution that you wanted anyway, right? That's how it always works. Now, when you create the problem, it doesn't mean that that thing isn't a problem. It can very well be a problem, but the problem in the way it's addressed is going to not neutralize the problem, but merely upgrade you into the next level of the game that we're in. And so when we're talking about, again, all of the AI, right? The threat of AI to the future of work, the issue of using vast data sets unaccountable for machine learning, all of that is being set up for the token engineering, right? That's what Ocean Protocol is going to do. They're going to pay you in tokenization for use of the data sets. It's not going to stop turning the world into an ant computer. It's not going to stop spatial computing. It's not going to stop digital twinning. It's simply going to offer you some micropayments, right? But they create the problem of big tech, and then they create the solution. So we know that the artist community, both music and visual arts, I don't know if the NFTs is extended to theater, but again, multimedia immersive entertainment, kind of theater, right? That was early on in the push for tokenization, right? Oh, the poor artists, they need to get their micropayments, right? And so what we're hearing now is stories coming out from various quarters, and, you know, they're being promoted. I think I saw something like a tweet, like a Whitney Webb thing, like, oh, maybe there's a way to use AI for good. Maybe we just shouldn't use the big tech kind, right? Maybe we should do, drum roll, peer-to-peer and open source, right? And all of the peer-to-peer open source, that is the signal exchange of the superorganism, right? That is those are the signals. Even if it's open, even if it's peer-to-peer, those peers aren't necessarily even going to be human. They could be engineered consciousnesses. They could be wallets, you know, like that are given to giraffes so that they justify their existence when they have to be relocated. That's the lead guard stuff that Leo was talking about. That we don't know what the peers are. And I remember when I was doing my education work, they were talking about the importance of peer-to-peer learning for children, that children really learned better with peers. And most parents would presume that that meant like small group work, even though, like, honestly, it never worked out well for me with group work. But yeah, that the groups were other kids, right? No, like Carnegie Mellon was setting up peer-to-peer learning where the peer was an AI avatar on a giant television screen. And they were getting money from DARPA to do this, and the Defense Department. So, and then now we know that Knowledge Works is setting up, you know, this idea that you'll have a lifelong learning life coach, and that goes along with the Navy's PAL system. That you'll just have your little AI that's nudging you along and giving your trajectory, whether that's, you know, attaining knowledge badges, or whether that's attaining some mental health status, or whether that's attaining financial literacy or physical health, that you're going to have this AI life coach that's pushing you through the game as an agent, right? As a peer, a node. And so when I'm talking about the biohybrid computing, we know, if you look back, there's a lot of interest in integral theory, right? Ken Wilber's integral theory, Julia Stillman and Fritz Kuntz, the Foundation for Integrated Education. Everything becomes integrated because, again, the math The natural sciences have to integrate with the social sciences. That goes back to Leibniz and the natural philosophers in England. So they've been interested in this integration. Essentially, in my sense, is to make the social computable, to access not only our surface social reactions, but the collective unconscious, and to make that computable, to make dreams computable, to make art computable, to standardize it in some way, even at a very sophisticated level, because art is a very deeply embedded communication, right, of issues, and to turn that into the computer, right? And that is the integration. That is the integral aspect. And so I need to spend some more time talking with Lynn about this huge map I've made of Tillman working on his soul work in Dallas, which goes back to the 70s. Now, Dallas has one of the largest urban arts districts in the country, or contiguous. There's a lot of money in Dallas going into the arts. And it's interesting, a lot of arts benefactors are also Jewish, and there's a lot of connections with Swedenborg and this interdimensional work with Oriental Kabbalism, and again, manipulating symbols and ideas towards, in my opinion, navigating the fields with these tokens, that using the art, tokenized art, as an intermediary to access an energetic field, right? Through our social relations, through our biology. And so when I made my map of Pegasus Park, because I think, Pegasus Park itself really speaks to my assessment that post-Moore's law computing is embodied intelligence connected to the field and on a ledger for optimization, as where we become integrated circuits, that we're circuits in a parallel processing system. And if you look back at Dallas, really Richardson, that's Texas Instruments. And at the time, I didn't really have a sense of that Texas was so deeply involved in the computing space. I didn't know that. But let's see, Kurt Kilby, Jack Kilby in 1958. So there were two people that were working on integrated circuits, and one was in California. They were right around the same time. And again, you think about morphic fields, right? It's like Leibniz and Newton and calculus. Things come to being at a certain place at a certain time. And again, that may be the archetype, the cyclical archetype that's coming into play. And so Jack Kilby was working at Texas Instruments, and he developed this integrated circuit. So I feel like the peer-to-peer with the token engineering, even if we have our own privacy-enabled digital wallet to protect us against big tech, right? But we need protect. And again, I'm not saying I'm a big advocate, rah Google. No, but it's problem, reaction, solution. It doesn't mean the problem isn't real. There can be a very real problem. But if we don't understand the larger landscape, we're going to accept the offered solution that literally is just moving us further down the road. And this offered solution of open source peer-to-peer systems in spatial computing is moving towards this new form of computation. Now, I think we could very well debate whether or not it's a good thing, right? And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I think we need to debate it publicly. We need to debate the idea of the Athenian superorganism and the AT&T smart city and the role of art in the collective unconscious and superintelligence in whatever the computing program is. What are we computing, right? If it's the interdimensional biofilm, like, can we ask what we're actually about? Because is it going to be like an Ender's Game? We think we're playing a game, only it's real, and only the controls we're operating aren't doing what is being represented to us. There are many, I have grave concerns. I mean, this whole system is Goldman Sachs and, the hedge funds developing impact securities where they can short vulnerable populations. And they're not telling people, right? So I have a lot of concerns that this isn't what is being represented, and that we don't have informed consent, and that in my opinion, I don't think we should be doing this until we actually have the capacity to be moral human beings and caring of each other. We're not there yet. We're just not. But at the very least, we need to have the conversations, right? Like, we need to have the conversations about it, both sides. And, I'll take a minute here, because again, this is trying to bust up some of the preconceptions of teaming. Because the computing system is also the parallel processing, tagging all of the teams for the compute, like which teams are needed for which parts of the programming. And it's cultural programming, right? So the culture wars are a huge piece of this. So I'm planning on going down to Arkansas. It's finally, the weather is nice. I go out and I get a flat of pansies to put in my pots in front of my stoop in my house, so that when we have an open house and someone comes to buy our house, I'll have some nice pansies out there, right? To make it nice. And the neighbors come out, and I've become a little detached from my neighbors. I used to be very close with them, but over the lockdowns, I felt like I no longer belonged, right? I didn't belong in this place. And this woman that I don't know very well, she's like, "Oh, you're putting your house on the market?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Well, where are you going?" And there's a presumption that it's a we, right? As opposed to just a me. And so I explained the situation and that I was going to Arkansas, right? And she's like, "Well, why would you go there?" And I said, "Well, it's affordable and there's beautiful nature, and I'm going to, get a little house and a kayak and spend some time in the woods and on the water. And that seems right." She's like, "But it's a red state, right? Like, oh, it's very red, And again, there's this presumption that you can assume for people but she's locked into this teaming thing. She probably doesn't even know anybody in Arkansas, right? And then I tried to explain. I'm like, I thought I belonged here in Philadelphia, but what I saw when things locked down was that actually people are incredibly closed-minded, and the civic conversations I thought that we should have, be having about the world, about emerging technology and surveillance and things, we weren't having, we weren't allowed to have. And so as someone who was a NPR liberal and then moved to more of a radical left, and then the lockdowns happened, and I'm like, ugh. And then I realized that the left is totally materialist, and that's not me. I'm realizing more and more the material is the distraction from the energetic spiritual. And so yeah, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to make it work. Right. And I'm not joining anybody's team, because as long as we're in the team thing, we're being manipulated, right? Whatever team, if it's team resistance, if it's team tokenized artists, if it's whatever that team is. And there's a human need to belong, right? To make sense of the world. It's sort of a shortcut, but I would just ask people to question, when there are stereotypes about teaming, who is that serving? So back to Dallas. Okay. So big tech being the bad guy, just to reinforce that, big tech being the bad guy is opening the door to peer-to-peer open source communication, in which we are nodes in the parallel processing in the noospheric ant computer, right? That's been predicted for 100th century, right? And Huxley would have known this, Julian Huxley. Think about it. He ran UNESCO, and Huxley was a biologist. He was the founding chair of biology at Rice University in Houston. And then what is Houston, right? Houston is space, right? Houston is space medicine, and Baylor and NASA, and they know about the fields. In fact, Julian Huxley, his focus while he was at Rice was on the axolotl, which is the salamander, which again, that's about, cutting off bits, and then they grow through the field, grows back the leg or grows back the tail. That's exactly what Levin is still working on 100 years later, is working in the fields. So Huxley knew that about the fields. And then he found UNESCO, which is all about unified culture. And again, thinking about culture as an artifact, culture as working with objects in the environment onto which we lay meaning individually and collectively, and then move around. And what that means to have those artifacts in the environment, in a ledger, and looking at the patterns and the swarm intelligence and the stigmergy, right? Because that's, Steffers has been so good at talking about, again, the group dynamics. That's the woman, oh, you can't go there, that's a red state, right? That's a teaming, that's a stigmergic artifact. Why is it red and blue? Why did we even come up with those? Those are signifiers. Those are symbols that are shorthand for a huge, big picture behind it. Red means this. And because I'm not red, that's bad. And then blue means that. All these things. And I'm not blue, and then that's bad, right? And because there's a woman that I presented to on this in Tulsa way back in this January 2020 on all this blockchain education. And she's very conservative. And she was just very shocked that I would be relocating to Arkansas because I'm liberal, right? So it works both ways. Like the red people don't like the blue people don't like the red people. And it's all manufactured because we don't really know each other. If we just knew each other as people, we could just put that down. But these are useful artifacts in the Ant computer because our peers are just, if we're red, our peers are red. And then if we're blue, our peers are blue. And then we use the artifacts in those particular ways. Think of all the signs of the culture wars, right? Think about the put up this sign to show how you feel about the world, right? Whether that's Blue Lives Matter, whether that's the rainbow flag, whatever, that is an artifact. And those are being used to steer people's consciousnesses towards this computation. Okay, so big tech, bad guy. Now we've got the open source peer-to-peer, which is what they really want because they want the open signals. And then my question is, okay, knowing all of this, do you want to participate, right? Because Bobby Kennedy is out there and he wants to give everybody a freedom wallet, right? Including the artists. You guys should keep your own wages, hedge your inflation with your Bitcoin wallets and maybe some Ethereum, and everyone will have a wallet so that you can be part of the open source peer-to-peer community. But do we know what that actually means? Do we know who the they is? Is it the interdimensional biofilm? Do we know what we're supposed to be computing together? And do we want to provide access to our culture, to our consciousness, to our relationality into that? And at this point, knowing who's involved, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it personally. But I don't get to decide for everybody. Everybody has their own choice, but we should at least know and talk about it publicly. So just getting back to Dallas, this was a piece of the Pegasus Park map that I had made. It's probably like 2.5 years ago. And again, Pegasus Park is the former Exxon campus in Dallas. Before it was Exxon, it was Zales Diamond. So again, we're thinking prisms. And now it is the confluence of both ed tech and biotech. Now, why would you have both ed tech and biotech in the same place? And University of Texas Southwestern is one of the hubs in the biotech space. It's because our biology and our cognition is part of the computing, right? The Texas Instruments, the Jack Kilby, the integrated circuits is now us. And we're the prosthetic to the AI reaching the singularity, which is us in the omega point becoming the global supercomputer, right? The vision, and it's done through cultural artifacts, as Julian Huxley knew, by creating UNESCO, which is sort of the unified documentation of culture. So in Dallas, one of the key players is the Hirsch family, Ken and Julie Hirsch. Now, Ken Hirsch is an energy advisor to the Carlyle Group. And his wife, Julie, was an alumna of Notre Dame. Now, we know that Notre Dame was a leader in the Mendoza Business School in the impact finance space, working with the Vatican. So they had organized at least 3 different conferences, I think 2014, 16, and 18, with the Vatican to set up impact finance. And again, that a lot of that is through the Catholic Relief Services and global aid situations. So Julie Hirsch is an alum of Notre Dame. Ken Hirsch is an energy advisor to Carlyle. Together, they have their own Hirsch Foundation, and they're very interested in depression research. So we have to understand that the integral theory, parallel processing, is also going to be based on our cognition and our mental health, right? How our brain works. Because I think actually the move is going to be through frequency and nanotech and molecular engineering with optogenetics and protein engineering to move towards some sort of synthetic telepathy. I'm not saying synthetic telepathy is good. I'm just saying this seems to be where things are going, is to make more people able to access the field of information. Okay. And so I mentioned that UT Southwestern was a major tenant at Pegasus Park in biotech. This guy, Madhukar Trivedi, he is connected to UT Southwestern, and he's doing Vital Sign 6, which is depression screening. Now, these depression screenings are being integrated in with green light credentials. So the blockchain credentialing thing. And so we've got, again, the ed tech And you've got your blockchain education badges, you've got your health status, and now you have your mental health screenings that are all embedded in the same thing. And so that's green light and vital sign 6 with this depression screening. Also at UT Southwestern is another Dr. Tasaduq, Tasaduq Mir, who's from Kashmir, so both from India. He's all about social prescribing. And I have a whole other talk about social prescribing. But the impact finance space, they're going to say, oh, if you have anxiety, we're going to prescribe you a pottery class, and we're going to have your health insurers pay for a pottery class, which on the one hand sounds cool. Like, I like pottery. It would be nice to get one over on the insurance company and have them send me to a pottery class if I'm a little anxious. But there's something more to that. And that is ultimately that's going to be blockchained, part of your blockchain healthcare record. And that's part of this cultural signal token system. So the other thing is Julie Hirsch is a major supporter, in addition to depression research, of the arts in Dallas. And so in addition to the arts, we have this other thing that this woman, Gail Thomas, and she's with the humanities in Dallas. So you've got the arts, you've got the humanities. Julie is looking at the importance of the arts to mental health, which again, I'm not against the idea of arts being helpful, but this micromanagement of mental health, literally, like I'm hearing from people that their college students are having to wake up every day and check a survey box on how they're doing. This overmanagement of mental health has to be understood as the integrated circuit of biohybrid computing, in my opinion. That's what it is. It's not anything about actually mental health. It's about accessing the collective unconscious through wearables and policy prescriptions that are wedded to cybernetic impact investing and the token engineering. So this idea of art and mental health and prescribing, that means they're going to track, oh, you went to this theater production and then on the next days your mental health was improved, right? Or you listened to the symphony and then it was improved. So it's interesting, during the lockdowns, Dallas actually had, there was a project underway where they made, it was like a musical theater, which again, it's very interesting that this new Mickey Willis, whatever, documentary is a musical, right? There's focus on these musicals because that's frequency. There was a musical that I think it was like a biography of Amelia Earhart, I'm pretty sure, which is interesting because I've got a pin in aviation. There's a lot of stuff with aviation I haven't quite come together around, but it was a musical about the life of Amelia Earhart, and it was sung by a choir that was its own nonprofit, but because of lockdowns, they couldn't sing together because you can't actually have your voice touching somebody else's voice. And once you know about frequency, and again, you have to put everyone into Zoom, right? Digitize the voice, digitize that frequency. And that each track of the, and I'm not sure if it was a choral group. So if it was different lines, but you could buy different layers of the production as an NFT. And then I think somebody had the right to buy the whole thing. Right. And so it was breaking down art into these units that were computable. And again, I bring us back to Leibniz and the Characteristica Universalis is, how do you make the soul computable? How do you network it and leverage it into some extraordinary situation? Now, again, I'm not saying that I agree with that, but it seems to me that they're like, look at the beauty of the human heart and the human soul, and look at the ways in which we are connected to the information fields and to God and to the divine creative process. And then look at these ants over here, and they're like doing these cellular automated things with very simple social rules and making amazing things. And what if we could turn human culture into a eusociality ant culture, right? That's what E.O. Wilson was doing with Jeffrey Epstein in Harvard. It was the eusociality, but not simply to make you a puppet or reduce your individualism, but to leverage it together, to network it to some larger end. It's complexity. The end is much greater than the sum of the parts. And if they were going to leverage anything for emergence, it would be the human soul. It would be the human creativity. So we should not be shocked about art NFTs, right? And we should not be shocked that the narrative that we need to protect ourselves from Instagram or Jeff Bezos or Google by doing peer-to-peer artifacts is somehow a revolutionary, rebellious act. It's not a rebellious act, guys. It's what is the next phase. And we need to debate with a clear understanding of the implications of that, what is happening, and if we should choose to do that, right? Some of y'all may choose to play Bobby Kennedy's Ant Computer game because you like him and you like having a freedom wallet and you like tokenizing your cultural property. And I'm not going to tell you you're not allowed to do that or that you're stupid for doing that. Ultimately, it's your choice. And your choices will be put onto the ledger for some purpose that is as yet unknown. But we should at least see problem, reaction, solution, problem, reaction, solution. How are the AI conversations being managed, right? The conversations are being managed that people aren't getting paid for the data being used for machine learning, right? Then the answer is Ocean Protocol and tokens, right? Oh, artists are getting ripped off and having their stuff sent into, used in nefarious ways. The answer is to give them a digital wallet and come up with some sort of privacy protecting, and then they can sell their wares in a peer-to-peer environment. But are we doing this? Are we going to become social computational nodes? Are we going to use our biology and our spirituality and our embodied imagination to, Robert Bosnak is developing AI companions for loneliness, right? Robert Bosnak also has ideas about Asclepian healing caves in virtual reality. Robert Bosnak wants to tap embodied imagination. We're going back to manipulating fields beyond our current ability to sense, manipulating energies. Soon to be a lot of what's moving forward is going to be about optics and photonics. It matters that Swedenborg and Leibniz were all about lens grinding, and that Rochester, which is a center of military defense contracting and in optics, and then had all of this work in the early radiation exposure, right? And the early Flexner Hospital and the psychiatric stuff. That's all built on Bausch and Lomb. It's all built on optics and prisms. So, we're walking the road. We don't know where it goes. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. And there are many vulnerable communities that are being taken advantage of. And I think in many respects, the arts community is vulnerable because they're always precarious. And yet that level of communication, that steganography, that depth of meaning making that's embedded in culture and environments and shared and being tethered into the ledger, tethered into the fields to, as again, Michaela Uluru, I'm working with luminaries to plan the future. Well, okay, so what if this whole thing is nonlinear and they're just in a different time scale, right? Looking over and poking us around and saying, okay, next up is to get them to agree to be peers. We're not going to tell them that peers are nodes, right? We're not going to tell them that their intentional communities are holons. We're not going to tell them, we're only going to tell the part of the story that will get them to do what we want them to do. So again, if you know artists, visual, music, theater, performance, and it also applies to sport. I mean, I think that sport is also a physical art form. Dance, just let's start thinking about it together. This is something that we have to think about. And I see there's one thing about free will, and yeah, there is this question, right? Do you have free will in culture, right? That was the kind of the focus of my last talk. We're born into a culture. What percentage of free will do we have? But I think taking away free will is not the goal, because the goal is to track the choices, right? And again, I just keep re-emphasizing that. This is a really fundamental idea. Now, I could be wrong, and ultimately there can be people who watch this and say, I'm not buying it. I'm totally in the Georgia Guidestone camp, and they're going to crash the dollar. And so I need my crypto tokens, and I like community currency, and I don't care if it's the Ant computer. I don't believe that that's what Jeffrey Epstein and Santa Fe Institute were really about. And you're entitled to do that. And I could ultimately have the wrong take. 6 months from now, I could get new information, but each little bit builds on this. And this week, my chunk has been looking at Swedenborg and his visions with angels and his connections in London publishing and Freemasonry, but also Oriental Kabbalistic aspects and the Moravians and Kundalini and Tantric and yoga and breath work and then linking back into Jung and depth psychology. And it all keeps getting deeper and deeper, but actually it's not blowing apart my previous things. I'm just getting further refined. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to go out and have a nice day with friends, and it's going to be good, and it's a nice weather, and I deserve it. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this. What is it? Biohybrid computing with collective conscious accessing the field. How will it be done? Through cultural artifacts embedded in the environment with stigmergy towards emergence, using our imagination, embodied intelligence towards imaginative emergence in the field, using game mechanics and choice theory on ledgers to shape the game. I think that's what that is. And then the big tech problems will be leveraged into this peer-to-peer open source, freedom cell, intentional community, Holon, community currency environment. And ultimately it's about signals. And so the Omega Point, Christogenesis, Singularity Net computer is us melding with the frequencies, right? And that machine really can just be molecules, right? It's a frequency. Us melding with the frequency in unity towards some computational purpose, puzzle solving purpose that I don't fully understand yet. And I don't know what is guiding it. To me, it seems like it's outside of our time scale if we're understanding this as, nonlinear time. So in the participatory universe, in Ken Wheeler's participatory universe, and Hugh Everett III's many worlds theory, art and artifacts are important. So we need to be careful how we share them. So have a good day, everybody. Bye.